Jewish Insights with Justin Pines on JBS is made possible in part by the clubs at Pearl River, New York, luxury rental communities for ages 55 and better, now leasing Phase 3 at the Reserve, and the B.L. Manger Foundation. The following edition of Jewish Insights with Justin Pines, with special guest Ambassador David Friedman, is made possible in part by Shalom and Iris Maidenbaum. Books by former U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman. One Jewish State, the last best hope to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And Sledgehammer, How Breaking with the Past Brought Peace to the Middle East, are available now wherever books are sold.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבת אחים גם יחד הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבת אחים גם יחד הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבת אחים גם יחד הנה מה טוב
Shalom, and welcome to a very special episode of Jewish Insights, where we are at a special moment in Jewish history, in a very special place in Jewish history. The very special place we are is in Jerusalem, in a place called Yamin Moshe, overlooking the old city of Jerusalem. And the special moment of history is this week, 2 years since the horrific events of October 7th, since many Jews and Israelis and non-Jews were killed, murdered, raped, taken hostage, and we went through two of the toughest years in Jewish history of both, politically trying to fight, militarily trying to fight, people praying for the return of the hostages and for their loved ones who were falling in war. We're coming out of an amazing week where, with the leadership of President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu and many other leaders along the world, we came to a ceasefire, and the remaining living hostages were brought home to the bittersweet yet amazing excitement of the Jewish people here in Israel where we are. And so now that there's been a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, we're trying to understand what that means, what it's going to look like, and what the future will be. And with me to discuss this historic, dramatic, and very emotional time I'm honored to sit today with Ambassador David Friedman. Ambassador Friedman served the United States ambassador to Israel under President Donald Trump and was a key architect of the Abraham Accords, transforming Israel's regional and global standing and really laying the groundwork for the events of this week. He's also the author of Sledgehammer, How Breaking with the Past Brought Peace to the Middle East, and One Jewish State, the last best hope to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He's also the executive producer and star alongside Mike Pompeo in Route 60, the Biblical Highway. I will say personally, I remember I was doing a speaking tour, mostly in liberal synagogues, when Sledgehammer came out. And I remember asking the crowd if they had read the book. And so few people raised their hand, even though it was like a bestseller at the time. And I remember saying, there is something wrong with the Jewish people if we're so focused on politics that Democrats can't read a book by a Republican about such an important story in the history of the Jewish people. And I came to push other things, but I just read that book at my in-laws, and I really pushed people to read that book during that trip. And if you haven't read it, pick it up and read it. It is such an important moment in history, and to hear the behind-the-scenes story from Ambassador Friedman is so powerful and moving. So if you haven't read it, pick it up. So this ceasefire agreement of the past week has brought relief and hope, but also deep questions about what's going to come next, what's going to happen for Israel's security, what's America's role going to be moving forward, and what is the future of the region going to look like. And so Ambassador Friedman joins me to bring unmatched insights to these questions and to have this conversation, to understand the challenges, opportunities now facing Israel and the Jewish people, and also to understand what just happened. So I want to, before we jump in, I just want to thank Shalom and Iris Maidenbaum for sponsoring this program. This is a very special episode. Thank you so much. They're close friends of both of ours, and they made the shidduch. And I also want to thank my in-laws, Rini and Dr. Tzachi and Rini Goldberg, for their role in making this special program happen. All right, with that, I'll stop yapping and we can get in. Ambassador Friedman, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Such a beautiful place.
Yeah, really. What a week. What a week to be in Israel. It's almost like President Trump planned for all the Jews who are here for Sukkot to be able to be here for this and enjoy and celebrate.
Yeah.
I was thinking about where to start this story. And we're at the time of year where we finish the book of Dvarim and we start the book of Breshit, and we realize that it's really hard to know where the story starts. It starts at Breshit, I guess. But I'm not going to ask you to tell the story from Breshit. I'd like to ask you to tell the story from where you're sitting, from when you became part of the Trump administration, and going back, I guess, like almost a decade now of this experience that led up to the Abraham Accords and the embassy, and now, of course, the ceasefire. When you're telling this story to someone about what actually happened, walk me through. President Trump takes over, and the Middle East is as follows, and where does it go?
So, we took over in early 2017 on the heels of UN Security Council Resolution 2334. And if you remember that was a resolution that was advanced secretly, but we know it was advanced by the Obama administration. And it essentially, like most resolutions, lots of words, lots of text, but essentially what it said is that the Jewish people have no right to live anywhere in their biblical homeland east of the Green Line. And that means Jerusalem, Eastern Jerusalem. It means the Western Wall. It means Hebron. It means Shiloh. It means, basically all of biblical Israel is now, according to the UN, as Hitler would say, Judenrein. It has to be free of Jews. And President Trump had already been elected at that point. We knew this was happening. We tried, very hard to just reach out to the Obama administration and say, hey, look, you're going out. Don't handcuff the president on his way in with something as consequential as this, when you're not going to be around anymore to handle the diplomatic fallout. They didn't care. They permitted this resolution to pass. So that's sort of the environment we were coming in on. Kind of one final act of hostility in a very hostile administration. Now they'll say, we gave Israel, $3.8 billion a year of military funding, so we're not really that bad. And people like to make that argument who want to be apologists for that administration. But essentially, it was an administration that did not recognize Israel's sovereignty over anything beyond an arbitrary armistice line that had been established in 1948 by a bunch of Arab nations who didn't recognize Israel's right to exist, who just said, we're going to draw a line here and agree to stop fighting until we get more arms and then try to push you into the sea. So it was very painful to a lot of people, and that was the environment. That's how we started. The question was, what is the best way to, re-establish strong ties with Israel in a way that will be good for Israel and for America? We were always kind of focusing on the duality of we want to help Israel, we want to be a strong ally of Israel. We also want to recognize that we're all Americans working for the United States. So there is this duality that we're trying to thread that needle and make sure we get it right. And if you recall, again, this is going back just before we came into office. John Kerry, who was then the Secretary of State, famously said, publicly, it's been played back 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times. He said, "Look, I know you people in Israel think you can do an end run around the Palestinians and make a deal with the Gulf states or someone like that. It cannot be done. The answer is no, 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 and no." He said, no 4 times, and said it just cannot be done. And that was their thinking. And we, our first reaction was they've done everything wrong, so let's just assume that everything they say, we ought to be. Our bias should be to do the opposite, right? So that was sort of the general view.
Sure.
But the main thing was this: the conventional wisdom was, if you want to, bring stability and peace to the Middle East, America has to pressure Israel. America has to pull back from its reflexive support of Israel. It needs to show the Arab nations that it can be kind of a good faith, arbiter, or, a mediator somewhere who can call balls and strikes down the middle. This support for Israel is antithetical to peace. We actually saw it exactly the opposite, right? The way we saw it is these countries have nothing. They have no particular alliance with the Palestinians. It's a political issue. It's a question of keeping their street from exploding. But they understand that they're fighting the same elements that Israel is. We're all fighting radical Islamists, and Hamas, and to some extent the PA, fall into that category. And so the idea was not to push Israel away from us. The idea was to hug them, to embrace them, to show that Israel and America were in this circle of trust, and then to invite other nations to join. And say, look, our interests are the same. Why aren't you? We're all fighting the same foes. We're all fighting radicalism. We're all fighting extremism. Why don't we join? And Israel, let's face it, guys, Israel is the strongest country in the Middle East. It has the strongest level of support from America, and has the best intelligence capabilities. Why are you? And it's never going away, And so President Trump comes into office. The first thing he does, and this is something that Jared Kushner orchestrated, I thought pretty brilliantly. He goes on a trip, his first foreign trip. And the first stop is Riyadh, right? And in Riyadh, he meets with 50 Muslim countries in this big, beautiful room that they had in Saudi Arabia. And he basically said two things to them. He said, look, I can be your best friend, okay? We can help you. We can have relationships you've never had before. But there's just two things. Number one, radical Islamic terrorism, okay, ends at your shores, doesn't reach you got to be my partner here in keeping these people away from America. I don't want them on my shores. You got to keep them away. And since they're coming from your borders, you protect us on your shores. Then the second thing is this whole idea that Israel is somehow going away. Just give it up. Like, it's not happening. Israel's not going away. Live with it. Make the best of it. Let's work together. And he sent that message. Then he immediately flies from Riyadh, right? And there never had been a flight from Riyadh to Tel Aviv, right? And believe me, it wasn't so easy to orchestrate this flight to get flyover rights from the countries involved. But he flies from Riyadh to Tel Aviv. And he meets with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he makes a similar speech there. And then he goes to the Vatican, brings in the Christian world, then he goes home. So he kind of united all these three faiths in a common message that Israel's not going away. Let's all keep the radicals are all killing us all. I mean, let's unite against it. And I thought that was incredibly important. And then you have this sequence of events over the next couple of years, which were singularly pro-Israel. I mean, they weren't, diplomatic events where he tried to thread a needle or get people to agree. He just basically made declarations. Number one, Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. Number two, we're moving our embassy to Jerusalem. We had a beautiful ceremony on May 14th of 2018, 70 years to the day of Israel's anniversary. Then he said, Golan Heights, it's never going back to Syria. I recognize your sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Then, together with Mike Pompeo, he came up with a thing called the Pompeo Doctrine, which reversed the State Department policy since 1978 and said, Jewish people have the right to live in Judea and Samaria. Right? We're not passing on right now on issues of ultimate resolution, but the Jewish people have every right to live in their biblical homeland, just as the Palestinians are living there now. And then the last thing, of course, was after doing all those things, right, you would say, okay, well, you're going to have hell to pay in the Arab world, right? I mean, you've done all these things that are so pro-Israel, and you're going to have a huge diplomatic issue. No, just the opposite. Just the opposite. When the Emirates saw how close we were with Israel and how this relationship was bearing fruit, they said, okay, we want to join it. Not without our own issues, but we want to talk about joining in. And then came Bahrain, and then came Sudan, and then came Morocco. And that was the first, grouping of the Abraham Accords, which frankly, I would say if we were, still in office, we would have had, we would have had a lot more by now. And we will have a lot more now in the second term. But the bottom line, and I'm sorry for being so long-winded, but the bottom line is our fundamental difference of opinion with our predecessors was in the notion of how America needs to relate to Israel. They said push them apart and show that you're not aligned with Israel and the Arabs will come in. We said no, bring them closer, give them a hug, do the right thing, make the right decisions. Jerusalem was always going to be Israel's capital. The Golan Heights was never going back to Syria. We have a lengthy history of our own legal scholars saying that Jews have the right to live in Judea and Samaria. So do the right thing, don't make things up, but at the same time, embrace Israel with their legitimate points. And you know what's going to happen? The Arabs are going to come in. They're not going to move away because they're going to see that this relationship is permanent and it's valuable and it's worth getting in on. And that's how the Abraham Accords came to be.
Beautiful. Okay, fine. We'll skip ahead a little bit, I guess.
I answered a few of your questions,
That was
probably.
great. That was great. No, it's okay. So, and then, President Trump is out of power and President Trump comes back into power. It's after October 7th. And, from your understanding, what's he seeing, what's he thinking, and how does it play out over, until this week?
So it's interesting. I would say that, again, I understand that lots of people have different political views, but as related to Israel, I think Biden, whether or not his heart was in the right place, and maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I'm not a psychiatrist, or I don't have visibility into that. But all the decisions, were wrong, and Trump had the vantage point of watching bad decisions play out, right? Which is, you're sitting in the bullpen, and the pitcher is throwing the ball down the plate and getting hammered. So okay, I gotta go to a curveball or a changeup, right? This guy's getting. So he watches Biden get hammered. He kind of invites Putin to come into Ukraine. He keeps using the word don't to America's enemies, and they're not paying any attention to him. There's really no strength being shown by America. There's no red lines being established. And so he comes in, and it just confirmed his instincts in any way. So, but it made it clear to him what had to be done. And as it relates to Israel, the most important thing was to basically send a message to the world. Look, I'm not putting any handcuffs on Israel. Biden may have, held back arms. No, we're going to undo that. Biden may have told them, we're not going to protect you at the UN if you do certain things. No, I'm not going to do any of that. I'm going to give Israel free rein to defend their citizens, to defend their country against, the most ruthless enemy since the Nazis, who say, if we're not killed, if you don't kill us, we will kill as many Jews as we can. I mean, they're not hiding who they are. They're not making any excuses for who they are. They're saying, look, we want to kill Jews. We want to destroy Israel. And if we manage to find a way to survive this war, we'll keep doing it and doing it all over again. That's our mission in life. And so Trump said, look, do what you got to do and defend yourselves. And that, of course, it took a while for that to settle in. I think this last push into Gaza City, which was the last, stronghold of Hamas, was having, a significant impact. But what Trump then did, which was special, which was unique, and I think only Trump could have done it, without detracting at all from Prime Minister Netanyahu. I thought, the fact that he was able to do all this and get an hour or two of sleep a night is just, he really took the fate of Israel on his shoulders. And I think we owe him a great debt of gratitude. And more than anyone, we owe the IDF and the soldiers and the incredible, brave people who protected this country a huge debt of gratitude. But the one, secret sauce that Trump brought into it was he took the entire Arab world and he put them on one side with Israel, right? Except for Iran, which, for all intents and purposes, the U.S. and Israel had already decapitated. So he takes the entire Arab world and puts them on one side diplomatically with Israel. And Hamas, wakes up in the morning and realizes that they're completely isolated. They've got nobody. They don't have Qatar anymore. They don't have Egypt anymore. They have nobody. And that, in combination with the last push into Gaza City, I think led them to realize, we have no place to go. And so without that, I think the war would be continuing right now. And I think that's what that diplomatic coup, which again, it was Trump, it was Jared, it was Witkoff. I mean, they saw this. It was very much something that was visible just from the experiences we had 4 years earlier. But getting that Arab world to move away from Hamas, dramatically, to side with Israel, to sign on to the deal where Israel gets 20, live hostages back, basically before anything else, as a predicate to anything else, took away all of Hamas's leverage. I think that's the added value that America brought to this.
Beautiful. And I just want to unpack it a little bit. So how did Trump do that? How did he get everyone in the same? I know, and I think in some ways it goes back to the Abraham Accords, I would guess, and the relationships across the Gulf.
Yeah.
But from your understanding on your sitting, which is closer to this than I am, certainly, how did that happen?
So there's a few things I don't understand. I wasn't involved, and I to this day don't understand how it all factored in. Like for example, like the attack on Qatar, right?
Yeah.
We'll read a book on it one day,
right?
And we'll all figure out, how that helped or hurt or contributed or, played a factor in all this. I just don't know. But what I do know is that, the president has, I think, again, I'm not in the room, but I think what he's gone to Qatar and said, guys, look, you've been a mediator. We appreciate the mediation efforts. They've resulted in hostages being saved. I'm not going to jump on this bandwagon of everybody who is hostile to Qatar, but you got to make another move. Mediation, over. Okay, you have to stand on our side against Hamas. Okay, we've taken mediation as far as we can. We need to isolate Hamas right now. You need to be with us. Okay, and he did that with the other countries as well. I think Qatar was the key. Mm-hmm. When they saw that they had lost Qatar, I think they realized that the game was over. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just a function of the president's the power of his personality. It's a function of his relationship with these countries, which are very good. It's a function of his kind of relentless pursuit of a deal. And I think people looked at it and said, look, we have two choices here. We could do what the president wants, or we could risk offending him in ways where he's willing to exert the power and prestige of the United States against us in ways that can be very painful. So, when I was an ambassador, I used to say, people said to me, how do you negotiate? I said, look, I was a lawyer for 35 years. I never had this kind of leverage. When you're representing the United States, for people who play poker, and I don't, but I know enough about how the game is played. If you're playing poker and every hand begins and you've got two pocket aces, mm-hmm. Before the dealer starts dealing the public cards, you're going to win a lot of money, mm-hmm. right? The United States has pocket aces in everything they do. They're the strongest country in the world. They have the largest military budget in the world. They have the reserve currency in the world. They have the largest economy in the world. Their economy is doing great. The rest of the world right now is suffering. America can do things, if it exerts its power, that make the world a better place, but you need a president willing to do it and who knows how to understand how to play the leverage. Mm-hmm. And Trump does. He does from his business dealings. And that's the difference of a Trump administration. It's like, why are we paying $1 trillion a year on a military budget, right? Our goal is to not go to war. Trump understands that you pay $1 trillion for a military budget. It keeps you out of war because nobody wants to fight with you if you can, if you're going to win every war in 2 days. If you're going to take a B-2 bomber and fly it 37 hours and thread a needle and destroy a Fordo nuclear reactor and fly it back safely, of course, with the help of the Israeli Air Force clearing the air defenses. But if you're willing to do that, people are going to take you very, very seriously, and that's what Trump is doing. And it's made, when America exerts its strength, the world's a safer place. If you go back to Obama, you remember Obama thought that our foreign policy should be very apologetic. We would apologize for America being strong, apologize for America being rich. We should invite all the countries to join us, and we would kind of be willing to shrink down our power and prestige and bring everybody else up. It doesn't work. It's not a good idea. I mean, America, with all its flaws and issues, is the greatest force for good in the world by far. And because of that, we ought to be exerting our leverage as much as we can. People may resent it, but at the end of the day, most people in the world want to see a strong America. They feel much better when there's a strong America, and that's the Trump doctrine.
Beautiful. I want to talk a little bit about the doctrine. I think, something that stands out to me, we all have, as a Jewish educator, we talk about kind of the moments in Israeli history that people live through that shape how they think about, the Jewish world. Before October 7th, there was always this challenge of nothing's happened here since Startup Nation, so kids don't care about Israel, and obviously that's changed significantly. But for me, the image, one of the images growing up was, Bill Clinton with Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat, and that was the image, and that was America. And it was the two sides, side by side, and it was in America at the White House. And I think hearing what you just said, it's totally different. America's still at the center of it, but it wasn't just America, right? Because he brought all these other countries in. Like you said, not in a way that said, everyone's on equal footing with us, so we're going to lower ourselves to you, but we have the power to get you to the table. So this feels like we're actually isolating Hamas in this case, so that we have all these Arab countries on which side, which I think is such a powerful piece of this. I think there's been, there's kind of several different pieces of interesting leadership, right? There's also the idea of politics versus business in terms of, traditional diplomacy. Another one people are talking about is this idea of make the deal and figure out the details later instead of let's work on every single detail, and until we work them out, we can't have a deal. From where you're sitting, what stands out is the different ways of approaching his effectiveness.
Well, look, people are looking at this deal based upon 20 points, and they're as media do and as academics do, they're analyzing this very carefully and is this really going to work? Is that going to work? Is Hamas going to keep this or that? And people ask me about it. And I'll tell you, I read the 20 points once. I thought they were, well done and well thought through and creative. At the end of the day, there's an expression in the Arab world, oh, that's just ink on paper, right? Meaning that, who cares? Who cares what we signed? Who cares what we wrote? We have a right under Islamic law to lie to infidels all day long. We can do whatever we want to do. So we'll sign what we got to sign to move on, but who cares? It's just ink on paper. And I take that view when I look at documents, with not with countries like the UAE or Bahrain or Saudi Arabia. I think it's a different level of they play by, I think, Western rules. Certainly, my experience has been that they play by Western rules when it comes to making deals. But the PA or Hamas, I mean, they don't play by those rules. They're not. So I looked at the 20 points and said, look, the points are great. At the end of the day, here's what matters. Okay, we're going to get 20 live hostages, back in one day on Israeli soil. We're going to return them to their families. Okay, this is a prayer that every Jew in Israel, not just the families, and we've all gotten to know these families. I feel like some of them, like I was just in such a state of I was an emotional wreck when I saw Noah Argamani be reunited with Avinatan Or, because I got to know Noah very well. We just spent 3 days with her in Rome, at an event, and she had no, this was just last month. She had no idea if he was alive or not. So that to me, transcends all the. Who cares about the 20 points, right? We got 20 live, real people that everyone in the state of Israel has come to know. Most people who follow this and care about it have come to know. We've prayed for their return every single day for 738 days. I'm just not going to think too much beyond that right now, because that metric on its own justifies everything else. Now, will the other 28 bodies be returned? I hope so, and if they're not, I think Israel's going to, be on solid ground, not moving forward with its commitments. But I think they will be returned. And maybe there's issues with locating them, but Israel can tell what efforts are being made by Hamas, and if they're making efforts to find them, hopefully they'll all be returned. I know, as I'm sure you do, I know lots of families who are desperately waiting to return just the bodies. And President Trump himself noted, he goes, I've never seen anything like it. I'm dealing with these hostage families, and they know their children are dead, and yet they want them home just as much as if they were alive. He said, I said, he understands the Jewish soul as it relates to just giving a child, a proper burial, how that means just as much as getting them home alive. So, I think he's been very moved by all this stuff. But anyway, I mean, I think you watch this play out, and you watch the actions, and you see how Hamas acts and if they do. I have no confidence in them whatsoever. But President Trump just said today, he said, look, Hamas is going to disarm, and they're either going to do it voluntarily or they're going to do it, violently, but they're going to disarm. And that's the right message. But to me, the deal, is we'll get the hostages back, and then everything else is just, we'll try to. But once the hostages are back, once those people are returned to their families, a national trauma, begins to heal. And when I spoke to the president right after his speech, and he asked me, what'd you think? And I said, you took, you took a nation in trauma, and you lifted them out of that trauma. For the first time, they're hearing from somebody who they trust and who they love, basically saying, you won the war. Go back to work. Go back to your lives. Let's rebuild Israel. Let's rebuild its standing in the world. I'll be there with you to make sure that you have the proper standing with all the nations that have turned their back on you. And when he said that, I mean, looking around the room, I just could feel people breathing again. For 2 years they didn't breathe, and here comes a guy who's the most powerful human being in the world by far, more powerful relative to the world than any president, I think, in history. And he's telling the nation of Israel, telling 10 million people, you won the war, okay? Your hostages are home, and let's go move on and create peace, a broader peace. Couldn't have been a better message at a better time.
Beautiful. I have so many things there. First, I'll say I noticed that in my body myself when I was sitting and watching, and then I realized afterwards, like I almost felt like my personality had changed.
Yeah.
You don't, we're all at different levels of closeness and distance from this, but it's something that's been weighing on the heart of every Jew since October 7th, and non-Jew as well. And this sense of you don't realize that like in other areas of your life it was affecting you because it's such a heavy weight.
It's a weight. It's a weight on everybody, and you just even if you don't think about it,
right.
It's there. Any joy you have in your life, I'm so happy, and you have this weight that just doesn't go away.
Right. All right. I want to ask you one question, which is always a hard question to ask, but I really want to hear your genuine view about it, which is, the question of this kind of exchange of hostages for prisoners. I remember someone told me this. I don't think he was a historian, but I don't know if this is your area of expertise either. But he was claiming that the Jews are the first people in history that behave this way about their hostages. That if you look back at wars over history, it's like something done on the side. There's war between Ukraine and Russia. They do a prisoner swap. No one hears about it, and they move on. And that when it comes to the Jewish people, their obsession with the value of a human soul, it just shapes the whole way society responds and thinks about these questions. So first of all, like, is that true in the political scheme? And is that like, I don't know if that's a good or bad thing for us. And then also, how do you think about this very challenging thing of knowing that, often the prisoners who we return are the ones who come back to hurt us later. And also in this moment, we hit this big return.
Well, look, in answer to the first part of your question, it's our strength and it's our weakness. I mean, it's both. I'm happy to be in a country or to be part of a faith that values life so strongly, and I accept that, recognizing that there may be circumstances where that creates danger. But I'm personally, theoretically willing to make that trade because I think valuing life in this way is what makes Israel so special. It's what makes the country so cohesive, even in times of real diverse viewpoints. It's a value that's, I think, very admirable. Now, in terms of giving up, ruthless criminals with blood on their hands who have committed acts of terror, and you read about these people being released and you read about what they've done, it's of course mortifying and infuriating. I'll tell you the answer I gave. I was on the news a couple of days ago. This is my take on it. Right now, there are probably at least 25,000 people around the world who want to kill every Jew they can find, right? I mean, they're out there. I mean, we know they're out there. They're sitting in caves. They're sitting in office buildings. They're sitting in in barracks. They're like insects. They've infested everywhere. We don't know all of them, but there's a lot of them out there. So let's just say, I mean, I'm making up the number 25,000, but there's got to be at least 25,000 crazy, deranged people around the world who want to kill Jews. So as a result of this thing, now they're going to be 26,000, right? Does it really move the needle that much? Not if the IDF and the security services and the Mossad and the FBI and the CIA, if we're up to the task of protecting human life, whether in America or Israel or throughout the world, if we're up to that task, we can function whether there's 26,000 or 25,000 terrorists or potential terrorists out there. That's how I look at it. I mean, we released Yahya Sinwar with the Shalit deal, right, which was the most, lopsided of all, right, 1,000 to 1. Sinwar was a ruthless criminal. Thank God he's dead. Is Sinwar the reason that we had October 7th? No, there are 50 other Sinwars out there that would have orchestrated October 7th. October 7th happened because Israel failed as a nation to protect its citizens, and massive intelligence failure. You can call it arrogance. Hopefully there'll be an official, well thought through, documented, analysis of how this happened. But no matter what, it was a massive failure, and that failure would have permitted Sinwar or 10 other Sinwars to have done what they did. So while it's emotionally taxing and potentially incrementally dangerous, again, I'm okay making the trade for these precious Jewish lives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. You mentioned the experience at the Knesset, which it was palpable watching on screen.
Yeah.
And I know there were viewing parties all over Israel. There, the King David lobby, people were watching with just that kind of experience. Just say a little bit more about. I couldn't even think of the right metaphor. I said it to my brother. Would be like if the best player on your team tore his ACL and you thought the future of the team was done, and then within 2 years suddenly you won 10 championships the same season.
Right.
I didn't know how to describe it.
Yeah.
What was it like everyone was in the room. There was like this like going around thanking people in the room. It was just, it felt unbelievable.
Yeah.
Just describe that experience.
Well, look, I've been in the Knesset a lot. I've been invited to lots of different sessions, and I remember when Mike Pence spoke at the Knesset. There were protests, there were people yelling. I remember, Kevin McCarthy. He spoke at the Knesset. A lot of Americans, American leaders come and speak at the Knesset. And I've been to lots of just sessions at the Knesset that have nothing to do with America, just where, I've been invited to participate. I've spoken at the Knesset myself a couple of times. It's a raucous place, right? I mean, it's not like, I would say it's not like the U.S. Capitol. The U.S. Capitol has gotten pretty raucous lately as well. But it's a pretty raucous place, right? And, it reflects the diverse political views of the state of Israel, which are quite spread out. It wasn't raucous this time around. There was one guy who, put up a sign who got thrown out. But basically, I've never seen such a incredibly unified and polite and uplifting and excited reaction to a speaker. And that's why, and again, I spoke to the president afterwards, and I said, you really just, there's like, there are all these different psalms where, King David talks about being lifted up. I call upon you from the depths, you lifted me up. We talk about, you lifted me up from the ground and, brought me to life. They all apply. This was basically a speech that unlocked the weight on 10 million people. And these 10 million Israelis, they have over the last 2 years, they have performed magnificently to keep their country alive, to keep their institutions alive, to continue to deal with the daily activities that require, that are relevant to a nation. But again, as we said earlier, it never, the weight of Jewish lives being held like caged animals underground, it was just too much for people to ignore. And so those hostages came out, within minutes he's giving his speech. He's talking about how America will always be with Israel, how Israel won the war, how the Israeli people, you can barely find Israel on a map of the Middle East, and yet they're so important, they're so dominant within the region, they've accomplished so much, their people are so incredible. And then he said, okay, let's move in a different direction now. The war is over, it's time to make peace. I will help you, I will help expand your relations with the countries. And it's just, again, it just was lifting up an entire nation on his shoulders and bringing him out of the dark, out of the dungeons, and bringing them back up so they could breathe again. And it felt that way. And every single person in that room, felt that way. People on the left, on the far left, it didn't matter. This was just a once in a lifetime moment where the leader of the free world, came to Israel's defense and performed, magnificently. And it was all there. It was palpable. My legs were sore because I was going up and down, up and down, up and down so many times. It was, and I brought my youngest child with me because, I had 2 seats. I probably could have gotten more, but I had 2 seats, and I had to think of who's the right person to come. My wife was, in fairness, she was busy preparing for the holiday that was about to start that night, right? So she was a little bit busy, but also my daughter, who's 23, lost 2 friends on October 7th. 2 friends, one in Nova and one who was in the IDF. And she, more than anybody, really felt the pain of it. And so I said, you come along, let's experience this together. It was incredible.
Wow. Yeah. And one of the things that really stood out to me, I was talking to a friend afterwards, was also, how Trump has evolved as a leader in this like second term version of him versus the first term version. And like even some of the off script things in the second, I think last term would have been panned and people would have focused that, and now people kind of seem to be hanging on every word instead. Yeah. And it seems to be a little bit, it's almost like the good stuff is in there because he's speaking in a way that like almost tells you what's going on behind the scenes and lands with you. What's your reflection as someone that was so involved in like along this process of, is it kind of like he had those 4 years, like you said, in the bullpen, and now he just like came out firing and like he's just focused on like what's going on? Is it a different approach? Like, what do you think?
Well, look, he came, he came into office in 2017, the most improbable election result in history, no political experience, becomes president of the United States. He's being urged by all the smart people, to bring in all these experts. So he brings in Reince Priebus, who's a head of the RNC, who's a political guy, not a Trump guy, but a political guy who's always thinking about it from a political perspective. He brings in very traditional people like Rex Tillerson and James Mattis, and these are just not his people, but he didn't have people. He hadn't assembled the team. He hadn't never been president before. So and from the moment he gets there, he's on defense, right? He's on defense from all the Russia hoax and the Mueller appointment. He had no idea that Jeff Sessions was going to within a week or two appoint a special counsel, which was going to torture him for the next 2 years. So he just kind of felt like he came in with the wrong people, with the wrong advice, with the wrong approach, and every time he wants to move forward on his agenda, he's playing defense. So now he has 4 years, to really think this through. He's learned a massive amount in those 4 years. He's become literally an expert in international affairs, the way that few people are, because he's had conversations one-on-one with all the world's leaders already. So he knows so much going into this thing, but he's also had the benefit of 4 years to understand what went wrong and how to make sure it doesn't go wrong again. And so, his team now these are people that support his agenda. He's not facing any, stupid lawfare actions against him. And he's been unleashed to really kind of pursue, his agenda. Now, when it comes to Israel, it's just been a massive breath of fresh air. He knows Israel well. He knows Netanyahu incredibly well. By the way, he knows Netanyahu in ways that you don't know when you first come into office, because Netanyahu is a brilliant man. I know I've spent many hours with him, sometimes late at night. We know each other very well. He's brilliant. He's very strategic, and he's also very careful about what he does. And Trump understands him well and understands how the assurances he needs to provide to Israel and to Netanyahu to move Israel to a direction which is the right place. Because look, Netanyahu has got this very right-wing government, right? There was almost no way that he could end this war, on his own without massive opposition from the far right, unless Trump comes in and says, look, this is what I want you to do. This is what we need to do together. And because the whole Israeli government, right, center, left, has so much respect for Trump and such appreciation of what he's done, he's able to play this role. These are all, acquired skills that he got, from his first term, and he just did it, magnificently. And you saw how during the course of his speech, he gave the appropriate credit to the Israeli government and to the IDF, because that's what Israel wanted to hear. They didn't want to just hear, well, the American president likes us, but they also wanted to hear the American president supports what our leadership is doing. And he must have spoken to, he must have pointed up to the Ramat Kal, to the head of the IDF 4 times. I spoke to Ayal Zamir a few times, and he was like, wow, he keeps, he pointed to me more than he pointed to his own. Mm-hmm. So the president understands how to create the optics and the political cover for difficult decisions. Okay, it's not easy to do. Mm-hmm. These are all tough decisions to make, politically, and he understands how to put the pieces together so that you can achieve, the right outcome through the political channels, and everybody walks away feeling like they've won.
Right. You talk about the art of the deal. It really felt like
very much.
We were watching art. It felt very, very artistic, and even that experience, the whole Knesset experience, felt like it was just perfectly done, and not just Trump. Everyone who spoke, really, it was gorgeous. Okay, so I want to spend a couple minutes really talking about what happens next and kind of the future. You talked a little bit already that the most important thing happened, which is getting the living hostages home, and certainly getting the rest of the hostages who have passed away home as well. There's kind of, I think of this in two versions. One is like what's going to happen next with Hamas, and the other is like kind of what's going to happen next with the region. I know none of us have a crystal ball, but how do you see this unfolding? If you, I know you're not a poker player, but if you had to imagine how this is going to unfold, is this going to be one of those where like in 2 weeks everyone, this is going to be an outdated interview because we're back to war again? What's going to happen?
So it's a great question, and I don't have a crystal ball. My sense is that the road from today to a demilitarized, non-threatening Gaza Strip will be fraught with some turbulence. I think we'll be able to land the plane eventually, but I think it's going to be a little bit turbulent. Hamas unlikely to go away on their own. Who is responsible? Who takes responsibility for disarming Hamas? Look, it would be great if some coalition force of Egypt and UAE and Saudi and whoever else comes in and takes that responsibility. Give Israel a break for a little bit. That would be great. If they can't do it or don't want to do it, obviously Israel will have to continue to do that. I'm hoping that I'm really hoping that it doesn't revert to a full-blown war again. What I think people may not understand, even your viewers who are fairly sophisticated when it comes to Israel and the Middle East, the Israeli army is a reservist army, right? And just to make clear what that means, people who you join the army, you serve for 3 years, right, or 3 years or 4 years. If you want to be an officer, you can go for longer, but the typical term is 3 years, right? That Army Corps of 3 years produces about 20% of the military power of the Israeli army. 80% are the people who have already graduated from the army, who've gone on, they've started families, they built businesses, they have homes, okay? They get pulled out from what they're doing. Some of them could be could be working on high-tech startups, some of them could be rabbis, some of them could be teachers, whatever. They get pulled out. And I would say the average reservist of the last 700, plus minus days has served in the army 400 days, right? That's more than half of their lives over the last 2 years have been spent in the army, away from their family. Most of them have kids. Some of them have a large number of kids. And a lot of them, by the way, have lost their lives and left behind, widows and orphans, in large amounts. They got to get back to work. I mean, they have to get back to their lives. No one in Israel has ever fought a war for 2 years before, and there is a real value in just kind of, letting others do the cleanup work, and if it can be done. If it can't be done, that's another thing. But let others try to do the cleanup work. Let the soldiers who are, the 3-year soldiers, let them do what they can do. Let the rest of the Arab world come in and do the mopping up, because nobody's going to care, if an Arab soldier kills an Arab on the street, nobody cares. It doesn't make news, right? They can do whatever they want to do. Just yesterday, Hamas executed a whole bunch of collaborators. You can see it on the video. They had these guys on their backs, and they just shot them, one by one. It's all over the news. Nobody cares. It's not meaningful unless Jews are doing, the killing. It's a terrible double standard the world has, but that's just the world we live in. Mm-hmm. But as I'm saying, let them go and let the Arabs see if they can clean it up, if they can. But it will come to an end. There is enough political will among the world to clean up Gaza. There's enough economic opportunity there for people to invest in Gaza. So, if you ask me what the next year looks like, I would say I'd be cautious. The next 10 years looks like, I'd say the trend will be towards a non-threatening, peaceful Gaza Strip.
Beautiful. I mean. And then let's expand out a little bit. Let's talk about the region. There are whispers of the head of state of Indonesia coming to Jerusalem already within 24 hours of this peace deal.
Yeah.
How do you see that unfolding? And again, that really harkens back to the work that you really laid the groundwork for through the Abraham Accords.
So Indonesia, I think, is of all the Muslim countries, the most likely to normalize with Israel and join the Abraham Accords, and it's the largest Muslim country in the world, as you know. The issues here are mostly timing and how to. This is a point which people should understand, which is we did the first Abraham Accord with the United Arab Emirates, and we did it on August 15th of 2020. And the way it worked out, we were in the Oval Office, and there was a three-way phone call orchestrated between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu and Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, who's the Crown Prince of UAE, and they had a prepared, script, and they all offered the script and offered, to normalize with each other's beautiful conversation. And up until the point when that phone call occurred, the number of people who knew this was happening, you could count on two hands, right? Maybe 4 or 5 people in America, maybe 2 or 3 in Israel, maybe 2 or 3 in UAE. And I can't tell you how important that is, okay? Because you gotta start with peace. When people start piling on against it, let them understand the deal's done, okay? The deal's done. It's not going anywhere. You can criticize it, but it's done. And they waste a lot less time trying to criticize something when it's done. Indonesia, it leaked out that the leader was coming, made it much more difficult. And Israelis are notorious for having loose lips.
Right.
I mean, you would think, oh, with the Mossad, they're so... No, the political echelons are very bad at keeping a secret. Thank God with the Abraham Accords, they were able to do it. But that's so it's got to be, again, there's a lot of stagecraft. There's a lot of creating the right environment where it goes off well and everybody has political cover and can handle this in a way where they can go back home and be deemed successful, victorious, right? Leaks keep that all from happening. So I think there'll be a lot more. I think it has to get done the right way, and every country has to get what they want. I tell everybody that every Abraham Accord with every country, you look at it as a triangle. You have Israel at one side of the base, an Arab country at the other side of the base, and America at the apex. And in every one of these deals, right, they're not all the same, because every country wants something different. Countries want something, the country wants something different from Israel. They want something different from America. They have to decide what can we get. So it's a three-way negotiation. They're not all the same. They end up at the same place, but the actual specifics can be different. And they have to be done delicately and carefully, and everybody has to make sure that they can live with the outcome, and it protects everybody's needs and interests and security. We were on a roll, before we left office, and we'll get back there. But we'll need Jared back in the fold. Jared, I think, is the key player in all of this. He knows this region so well, and he was so helpful. I'm happy to play a role if the president gives me a role, and we'll see where that all plays out. But I'm pretty optimistic.
Beautiful. I love hearing that as well. I mean, you referenced one part which is kind of like, let's call it the civilian role in some of these things. One of my favorite things to quote is, and it's funny, given who I'm speaking with, Tal Becker always says, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will not be solved in a synagogue in Boca Raton.
Right.
Which is, and I know that both you and my in-laws spent a lot of time in Boca Raton, so with full respect to Boca Raton. I think, one of the big challenges here was, since October 7th, and really always, has been kind of the Jewish obsession or investment in having opinions about politics, right? Mm-hmm. And there's one thing to do your part and advocating and praying and all those things, but as someone who has been really inside the room, and when you see people at their Shabbat tables, and there's a lot of arguing about stuff that's really so far, I imagine, from facts, and of course news as well. You look at flipping through channels on during the Knesset speech and going back and forth. What is your advice to people who aren't in the room in terms of how to have a sane life and to try to think like, are they spending too much time on this? Should they be reading different things? Like, is it like, guys, go learn some Torah. Enough is enough, because you have no idea what you're talking about. I was in the room, and it's the opposite of what they said in the news.
Surprisingly, a lot of what people talk about at the Shabbat table and the points they make are not that far from the truth. They may be far from the truth in terms of what a particular person said to another person in closed quarters, but the basic idea that Israel is a just country. The cause of Israel is a just cause. The covenants that God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are covenants that should be kept. The prophecies of Isaiah and of Ezekiel, Jeremiah, are prophecies that we believe will come true and are beginning to come true. The Arab world is divided between moderates who very much want to embrace modernity, and we should be embracing them as they go along that path, and radical Islamists who will kill us if given the opportunity and will never change from that point of view. And we have to make sure that they don't gain control over strategic territories or countries. That's all true. I mean, that's all true. Now, how you get there and the specifics of it, people can debate. But I wouldn't discourage anybody from having those conversations. I had them my whole life until I became an ambassador, and when I came in, I didn't see things that different. What I think is important, though, for people to think about, because, and this is my second book called One Jewish State. If I firmly believe that Israel can never give back its biblical heartland. Now, I believe that for lots of reasons. I believe it for strategic reasons. I've studied the security issues probably more than anybody. I've met with every single general. There's no way that Israel can defend itself from a military perspective if it gives up Judea and Samaria. Just can't. Okay, so I also believe that if you're a Jewish state, you can't be negotiating the places that make you Jewish. What makes us Jewish? Jerusalem, Hebron, Shiloh, Beit El. I mean, this is where all our biblical stories took place. You can't give it away. If you give it away, what does it say about you? What won't you give away? If if the Arab world will have no respect for us, and I've had this conversation with very high-ranking Arabs, and I tell them, listen, what do you want me to do? What do you think we should do? You want the Palestinians to have Hebron or Shiloh? I mean, you understand how important this is to our story? Would I ever ask you to give away Mecca? Would I even ask? You don't allow non-believers into Mecca. I don't care. It's your, I wouldn't even ask you to come visit, Mecca or Medina. It's so holy to you. They said, look, we're not telling you to give it up. We understand. You're the guys talking about giving it up. Like, you're the ones putting it on the table. Your government, the Israeli government, is putting it on the table. I said, well, they're not going to do it anymore. They can't do it anymore. And so it's but what I tell people is look, you want Hebron, I'm with you. You want Shiloh, I'm with you. You want the whole territory, I'm with you. But understand that we live in a world, and we have to be accountable. If Israel's going to be sovereign over Judea and Samaria, it's sovereign over everybody who lives there. It's not just sovereign over the Jewish people, it's sovereign over everybody. Just like Israel right now, inside the Green Line, is sovereign over 1.7 million Arabs, right? And it's done a really good job with regard to those 1.7 million Arabs. They've risen to the highest levels of law and commerce and business. I mean, a close friend of mine who's the former chairman of Bank Leumi, the largest bank in Israel. He's a Muslim Arab. Mm-hmm. So we have a history of owning our responsibility to people that don't look and sound like us, right? We have to do that. And if you want Judea and Samaria, as I do, you got to do that too. You have to own the entire population and treat them with the dignity and respect that you would expect yourselves to be treated with. And that's the point of my book, which is, what is the win-win? If you want to go to President Trump, you want to go to any other leader and say, we want to be sovereigns, don't come across like, we're going to grab what we want and leave the rest for somebody else to decide. Have a complete holistic solution, to the entire population. That makes everybody's lives better. That lifts everybody up. If you can do that, you're entitled to be the sovereign. If not, then you're just going to be in a perpetual state of war for on this land forever. And that, I think, is a point that a lot of people don't get. They say, look, we don't like these people. We don't want to have anything to do with them. But we want what we want. We want Shiloh. We want Beit El. But we don't want Ramallah, which is next door to Beit El. We don't want Jenin, which is near. We just want what we want. And we want to leave behind a bunch of isolated pockets of hostile Arabs, which invariably, if that's what you do, you'll end up with a bunch of pockets of Gaza all over again. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have no place to go. They have no land. They're landlocked. They're going to be, that's not a solution. Okay? I mean, that's just not a solution. So think big. Think about a solution. Think about the fact that Israel has the track record, the only track record in the Middle East, of empowering its minorities. And think of how you want to be sovereign over Judea and Samaria, over our biblical homeland, but be empowering the Arabs that live there that don't want to kill us. The ones that want to kill us, we'll kill them first. But the ones that don't want to kill us, which I'm still naive enough to think is the majority, mm-hmm. Let's make their lives better. And I've sat with lots of Palestinians who would love that approach. Mm-hmm. But as we're sitting around the Shabbos table, we can't just think about what we want. We have to think about what's a solution that we can be proud of, that's sustainable, that we can look somebody in the eye and say, yeah, we're sovereign over Judea and Samaria. that guy in Jenin, okay, he's going to medical school in 2 years. This guy in Ramallah, his business is now selling 3 times what it was selling before, and nobody's at risk because of it. If we can do that, I think we can solve the Arab, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is why the subtitle of my book is The Last Best Hope to Resolve the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict. There is a solution to this. It's not a Palestinian state. It's also, by the way, and just in case your viewers are saying, wait a minute, you're going to let 2.5 million, Palestinians become citizens and vote? No, I don't suggest that either. I mean, and that's the whole point of it being one Jewish state. There's 20, 30, 40 Muslim states around the world, right? National religion is Islam. There's actually countries with national religions that are Christian, national religions that are Hindu, Buddhist. We just want one Jewish state, right? And there's no way that we can absorb Palestinians into Israeli society in a way that enables them demographically, all right, to change the Jewish character of the state. So there have to be limits on, just like, no Jew can get into Mecca, there have to be limits on the ability of Palestinians to alter the character of one Jewish state, okay? But within that construct, you can elevate their lives in ways and elevate their human dignity and their prosperity in ways that I think would make greater Israel a much more peaceful and prosperous place.
Okay. All right, we are out of time. Ambassador Friedman, I want to thank you so much. What a special time to be in Yerushalayim and to sit here with you and to reflect on these experiences. And I hope everything you're saying in terms of, peace within our four walls here and also peace within the region really comes true. And wishing you success in everything you do for both America and for Israel.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
V'chein yehi ratzon.
Amen.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבת אחים גם יחד הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבת אחים